Maid calls billionaire. Please come home now. She'll destroy your child. What happened next? The phone rang 3 times, then fell into a chilling silence. In the corner of an elegant, tastefully decorated living room inside a villa nestled in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, a little girl no older than 7 trembled like a leaf in the wind. Her name was Emily. Her tiny hands clutched at the wrinkled folds of her pink dress, now soaked with tears. Across the room, Lena, the family's housekeeper, held the phone tightly to her ear, her knuckles pale from the pressure. Her voice was no louder than a whisper, but it dropped heavy and unrelenting, like a stone sinking into the heart of the listener. "Sir, please, you must come home. If not, she will destroy your daughter." But Michael gave no reply, and that moment of silence would become the fracture that cost him everything he had left. Emily sank down onto the polished wooden floor, her small frame swallowed by the vast space around her, the expensive rug beneath her offering no warmth against the cold that filled the room. Her eyes, red and vacant, held none of the light one might expect in a child. Even the gilded clock above the fireplace, ticking faithfully on, could not pierce through the heavy stillness blanketing the air. Lena turned to look at Emily with a gaze full of despair, but fear held her back. Facing them was Ava, the woman who had seemed so perfect when Michael brought her into their lives less than a year ago. She stood upright, arms crossed, her eyes sharp and unyielding as they followed the small girl's every movement. Ava wore a long, black designer dress, and her heels struck the marble floor with deliberate precision, each step cutting through the air like cold shears. "Emily," Ava's voice rang out sweetly, yet beneath that sweetness was the unmistakable edge of steel. "I told you to clean up your toys before dinner. Why must you always disappoint me? I'm sorry." Emily's voice was barely audible, a breath lost in the cavernous space. "Sorry isn't good enough." Ava laughed, though it wasn't the sound of joy. "Do you really think saying sorry makes things better? Your father worked so hard to give you everything, and this is how you repay him? With laziness and mess?" Lena stood motionless, her heart pounding. She had seen moments like this before, but today felt different, heavier. Ava's words were not just scolding. They were a slow, deliberate tightening around Emily's spirit, squeezing until there was nothing left but guilt and shame, all for a simple mistake that any child could make. A little juice spilled on a rug in the morning, now twisted into a moral failure. Lena wanted to speak, to stop this, but she knew the moment she opened her mouth, Ava would turn on her too. Moments later, Ava knelt down, her perfectly sculpted face inches from Emily's. There was not a trace of warmth in her eyes. "Next time, think before you spill. Every action has a consequence. The sooner you learn that, the better." Emily nodded faintly, tears trailing silently down her cheeks. Lena turned quickly toward the kitchen. "I'll make her a sandwich." "No." Ava straightened sharply, her voice rising. "I set the rules when Mr. Michael isn't here, and I said no dinner. She's 7. You can't starve a child." Lena's voice cracked, nearly breaking. Ava stepped closer, her gaze cold and sharp like twin shards of ice. "Be careful, Lena. You're treading dangerously close to accusations that could cost you your job. Do you really want to test me?" Lena said nothing. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Michael. In a meeting. "Is everything okay?" No. Everything was not okay. Lena glanced at Emily, now curled into herself, hugging her knees, face buried in her arms as if trying to disappear. Lena typed quickly, "Sir, please call me as soon as you can. It's about Emily." "It's urgent." She hit send, praying that this time he wouldn't ignore it like all the times before, praying that he wouldn't let his hesitation and blindness become the price paid by his daughter's safety and childhood. But the phone remained silent. And in the corner of the room, Emily spoke in a voice so soft, Lena almost missed it. "I want to see my mom." Lena felt her vision blur. She wanted to gather Emily into her arms, to whisper that it would all be okay. But Ava still stood there, arms folded, eyes full of warning. The golden clock ticked on, each second falling like a blade across Lena's chest. And somewhere across the city, in a sleek, high-rise boardroom, Michael sat unaware that a single missed message, one call left unanswered, could cost him everything he had left in this life. Before we continue with the next part of this story, if you feel that it has truly touched something deep within you, don't forget to subscribe to the Emotional Echoes channel right now, so you won't miss the heartfelt, human stories we share every single day. Where are you listening from? Drop the name of your city, state, or country in the comments below and let us know how far this story has traveled. And please, don't hesitate to share this video with someone you care about. You never know who might be in need of a genuine emotional moment in the midst of a chaotic world. And now, let us step together into the second part of the story. The house rested quietly among the upscale neighborhoods on the outskirts of Portland, its white walls pristine against the silver-gray roof tiles, its garden trimmed with careful precision, a place so peaceful that morning walkers often pause just to admire it, never knowing that inside this seemingly perfect home, the heart of a child was slowly breaking apart. After Ava's cold footsteps faded as she went upstairs, Lena walked softly toward Emily and knelt to place a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. Yet Emily did not lift her head and only shook it faintly, as if telling her she should not come closer. Lena drew her hand back, her chest tightening. 2 years earlier, when she first arrived at this house, Emily had been a child of laughter, always running circles around the backyard with her stuffed rabbit named Mr. Flop tucked under her arm. Her mother, Claire, still alive then, used to sit on the back porch every afternoon with a book in hand, watching Emily with a soft smile and calling into the house now and then to say they needed more cookies. Lena remembered those afternoons with absolute clarity. But everything changed during a bitter winter when Claire passed suddenly after a stroke, leaving Emily with a hollow ache no one seemed able to soothe. Michael, once a father who adored his daughter, grew quiet and distant, burying himself in work, traveling constantly, surrendering the house to the cold machinery of schedules and money. Then Ava arrived. Michael had met her at a grand charity event hosted by the company, and Ava dazzled everyone with her beauty, her charm, her perfect answers to every question. Even then, Lena had felt uneasy, but she had no place to interfere. Those around Michael seemed relieved that he had finally found someone who might pull him out of his grief. Only Emily felt no joy. The little girl had not smiled the day Ava moved in. She had instead retreated to her room, held Mr. Flop the entire day, refused dinner, and spoke to no one. That evening, when Michael introduced Ava as his new girlfriend, Emily's eyes were not surprised. She simply stared at Ava for a long moment, then turned and walked away, as though she already sensed something the adults refused to see. And now that instinct was becoming truth. Lena stepped into the kitchen, where warm yellow light glowed across the cool granite countertop. She took bread, peanut butter, and a banana, and prepared a small snack for Emily despite Ava's orders, unwilling to let the child fall asleep on an empty stomach. When she returned to the living room, Emily still sat curled in the same position. Lena placed the plate on the table without a word and lowered herself to the floor a short distance away so Emily would not feel crowded. 2 minutes passed, then 5, and finally Emily lifted her head. Her eyes were still red, but no longer spilling tears. She looked at the plate, then at Lena, who did not urge her but only gave a small nod, a quiet permission. Emily crawled closer and carefully picked up the sandwich, and in that brief moment, Lena saw the faintest echo of the Emily who had once been the bright spirit of this home, a child untouched by fear, unbound by the rigid rules of a woman who lived for perfection. Ava was the embodiment of flawless appearance, knowing how to cook, how to speak, how to choose gifts that pleased Michael, how to make others believe she was the ideal partner, yet behind closed doors, when the audience disappeared, She became a woman who controlled, manipulated, and slowly wore down the fragile confidence of a child who had already lost her mother. Lena knew that in a few more months, if Michael failed to see the truth, Emily would vanish entirely, not in the literal sense, but in the quiet fading of her gaze. She had seen this before in stories from friends, in children who went silent, not from obedience but from fear. Lena glanced at the clock. It was nearly 8. Michael still had not called. Fear rose inside her, a deep and troubling thought that if he never listened, if he continued trusting Ava without question, there might come a day when Emily no longer trusted anyone at all. She looked toward the staircase, where light from Ava's bedroom cast a pale glow down the steps, like a warning. In this beautiful house where everything gleamed and appeared perfect, the heart of a child was breaking a little more each day, unseen and unheard by everyone except the housekeeper, who watched helplessly as it happened. Emily sat, curled up on her bed, a small figure lost in the room that had remained untouched since the day her mother was still alive. The watercolor paintings still clung to the walls, the heart-shaped pillow still rested at the head of the bed, and the cat-shaped nightlight still cast its gentle glow each evening. But all of it had become a shell, stripped of the warmth that once made it home. Since her mother's passing, Emily's world had fallen into a quiet unlike anything she could explain. There were no more soft bursts of laughter in the kitchen while batter was mixed, no more gentle humming as her mother washed her hair, no more loving arms wrapping around her when nightmares pulled her awake in the dark. The house remained beautiful, clean, complete in every way that could be measured from the outside. But love, attention, and most of all the feeling of being truly seen, had disappeared the moment Claire did. Emily couldn't put it into words, she only knew something had shifted. Her father had become distant. He still loved her, somewhere deep down, but his grief had locked him inside himself. The evenings Emily once looked forward to, when the family gathered around the table, had turned into meals eaten in silence or alone in her room. Michael came home late, often skipping dinner altogether. And Ava, the woman Emily never once called Mum, was always present. She was in every corner of the house, and yet her presence made everything colder. Emily had once tried. She had politely called her Miss Ava, had forced a smile when presented with expensive toys she never asked for. But each time, Ava responded with a pointed comment on Emily's manners, or a glance that made the child feel small, wrong, and burdensome. So day by day, Emily learned silence. She learned not to speak her feelings, not to cry where anyone could see, not to react when scolded for things she couldn't understand. Bit by bit, she became a shadow in her own home. Each morning she woke in silence, dressed herself in her school uniform, tied her own hair, and came down to breakfast without saying a word. If Lena weren't there, she would have likely skipped the meal altogether. Lena was the only person left who made Emily feel safe. She didn't talk much, but she was always there when it mattered. A soft nod at just the right time, a sandwich placed quietly beside her, a blanket tugged gently over her in the middle of the night. These small things reminded Emily that she was still a child who mattered, if only just a little. In her dreams, Emily often saw her mother. The dreams were hazy, but deeply felt. Claire would be standing in the backyard, calling her close, arms outstretched. But each time Emily ran toward her, her mother would fade into the light, leaving her standing on the cold grass with a hollow ache in her chest. She never told anyone about those dreams. Once, she had asked Ava if people in heaven could still see us. Ava had stared at her for a long moment, then answered with a dry, cutting tone, "Maybe. But if she could, I imagine she'd be disappointed in the way you behave." After that, Emily never spoke of her mother again. She tucked the photographs into a drawer, hid Mr. Flop in the back of her closet, and let the memories blur. But the longing never left. It lived in her sleep, in her glances, in the rhythm of her breath. She didn't blame her mother for going. She had once wished Claire had stayed, but now she only felt angry at the world for not leaving behind a single person who could love her the way her mother once did. And in the longest nights, when Lena had gone to her room and her father was still somewhere out in the city, Emily would whisper words no one else could hear. "I miss you, Mum. And I'm scared. This world without you is colder than I ever imagined." Ava descended the staircase the following morning with the poise of a woman who had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her golden hair was brushed to perfection, her light makeup gave her skin a radiant glow beneath the soft morning light, and her pale blue silk dress hugged her slender frame in all the right ways. Each step she took across the polished floor exuded confidence and control. She offered Lena a gentle smile and asked a simple question about breakfast before moving toward the dining table, where Michael had already taken his seat. As usual, he was sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, the fatigue of another endless work week etched into his face. Ava rested her hand lightly on his shoulder, leaned in, and kissed his cheek. "Good morning. I've finalized the guest list for next week's charity event." Michael nodded without looking up. "Good. Thank you." That was all. Just a few short words, but for Ava, it was enough. Each quiet approval from him felt like one more step toward the victory she had been building carefully. Everything was falling into place. She had entered Michael's life like a spring breeze, never forceful, never rushed, but gentle enough to slip into every hollow place inside, a grieving widower who longed for something that felt like hope. Ava had always known how to present herself as intelligent and emotionally attuned. When she first visited Michael's home, she didn't impose herself on his daily life or try to win over his daughter too quickly. She appeared only during appropriate occasions, bearing modest gifts, offering soft compliments, always keeping just enough distance not to seem like a replacement. But when Michael began to trust her, when he started to speak of sleepless nights and lingering sorrow, when his gaze began to linger longer on her face, Ava knew she was halfway there. Soon after, she began staying over. Then she moved in, bringing her clothes, her perfumes, and all the habits that quietly rewrote the household. She changed the way the living room was arranged, replaced the curtains, introduced new table linens. Michael accepted each adjustment without protest, too exhausted to notice the details, and perhaps too willing to believe that this was what moving forward was supposed to look like. But for Emily, those changes marked the beginning of a quiet nightmare. Ava knew it. She understood that she would never earn affection from a child who still lived in the memory of a mother now gone. So she did not try to be loved. Instead, she chose control. At first, it came in the form of gentle reminders to keep things tidy. Then came the rules. No toys left out. No speaking when adults were talking. No mention of her mother. Each rule arrived cloaked in logic. Ava insisted children needed discipline, that Emily had to learn proper behavior, that she was only trying to help Michael raise a respectful young girl. When Michael was around, Ava played the part perfectly. She hugged Emily at bedtime, served balanced breakfasts, and spoke to Michael each evening about Emily's so-called progress. But once the bedroom doors closed, the soft voice vanished. In its place came the whispers that cut like blades wrapped in silk. "You should be grateful anyone puts up with you." Or worse, "Your father doesn't talk about your mother because he's trying to forget her." Emily was afraid, but didn't know what to do. Michael was always busy, and whenever she tried to speak, he would interrupt with a hurried hug or a vague reassurance that everything would be fine. And Ava, behind her flawless mask, used that silence to build a world where Emily had no voice, no defense. Lena saw it all. She noted every flicker of pain that crossed Emily's face after Ava left a room. She heard the quiet sighs in the dark, noticed how Emily flinched when someone raised their voice. Lena began keeping track. She wrote down every time Ava withheld a meal because of spilled milk, every toy discarded without cause, every cruel whisper that left Emily in silent tears. But Ava was careful. She controlled every gesture, every word, every glance. To outsiders, she was the picture of kindness and patience, a young woman who had willingly stepped into the life of a man with a child, never complaining, always helpful, even organizing charity events and supporting Michael's community work. She was the textbook image of a perfect partner. But Lena knew that beneath that polished surface lived a woman who cared for no one but herself. A woman slowly turning the house into a place defined by power, control, and fear. And what frightened Lena most wasn't just Ava's true nature becoming clearer. It was that Michael still saw nothing at all. Ava wasn't just wearing a mask for Michael. She was slowly convincing him to wear one with his own daughter, and if no one tore that mask away in time, it wouldn't just be a broken heart left behind. It would be a child who had her childhood stolen, piece by quiet piece. In the days that followed, the rules inside Michael's home were no longer gentle reminders, but hardened commands, rigid and cold, enforced by Ava with the precision of someone running a strict corporation rather than living alongside a child barely 7 years old. Emily heard those rules every day, echoing in her mind like invisible lines carved into the walls. Do not make noise when adults are speaking. Do not ask for snacks between meals. Do not cry. Do not question. Do not ask about your mother. Do not disturb Ava when she is busy. And above all, do not say anything that might upset your father. Each rule came with a vague warning that there would be consequences if she failed. On the first day, Emily tried her best. She tidied her toys, stayed silent during dinner, washed her hands twice because Ava insisted she had dirtied the stair rail. But no matter how hard she tried, Ava always found a flaw. You are holding the spoon in the wrong hand. You are not sitting straight. You are eating too slowly. You spilled a few drops of water on the table. Small things that would be ordinary for any child elsewhere became proof in Ava's eyes that Emily still had not learned how to exist the way she demanded. Punishments soon followed. At first they were only delivered in a cool, sharp voice. Then toys were taken away. Soon after, meals were withheld whenever Ava felt Emily needed to be taught obedience. Lena had witnessed one such evening when Emily was forced to watch Ava throw her full dinner plate into the trash simply because she had forgotten to bring her book from the study to the living room. Ava smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. Every action has a consequence. Emily stood still, her lips trembling, yet she dared not speak. Tears fell only once Ava turned her back. The sight crushed Lena, a pain squeezing her heart like a fist. She had tried many times to intervene but was always silenced by Ava's icy authority. You do not have the right to raise her your way. You are an employee. Know your place. Every word carried a sharp edge that left Lena unable to respond. But what frightened Lena most was not Ava. It was the change she saw in Emily. The child spoke, less with each passing day. Once, even in sadness, she had sought Lena when she could not sleep, had shared small stories from school, had asked innocent questions like why leaves change color or whether her mother could see her from the sky. Now, everything was different. Emily stayed silent from morning until night. She did not ask, did not request, did not react. When scolded, she lowered her head. When punished, she nodded. When hurt, she fought back tears. One afternoon, Lena tried to cheer her by inviting her to paint, something Emily once loved. The child stared at the blank paper for a long, hollow moment before setting the brush down and whispering so softly that Lena had to hold her breath to hear. I cannot draw unless Miss Ava says I can. Lena froze. Every joy belonging to a 7-year-old had become something decided by a woman who did not love her. On many nights, Lena heard cautious footsteps in the hallway or faint whimpers drifting from Emily's room. But when she opened the door, the child pretended to sleep, her small shoulders trembling beneath the dim glow of the nightlight. Lena knew Emily was trying to live by Ava's rules, not because she wanted to, but because she was afraid. Afraid of punishment, afraid of hunger, afraid of angering her father. Afraid that maybe she truly was as useless as Ava claimed. Afraid that if she made a mistake, her father would be disappointed and then leave her, just as her mother had gone. It was a weight no child should ever carry, yet inside that large house, with its flawless design from painted walls to perfect curtains, that fear settled into every corner. It clung to Emily like a shadow, growing larger, growing darker. And Lena understood that if no one spoke up, if no one broke the silence, Emily would disappear inside the world Ava had built, a world shaped by rules, punishment, and the quiet retreat of a child learning not to believe she deserved love at all. Lena stood in the kitchen drying the dishes, her eyes drifting again and again toward the hallway that led to Emily's room, while outside the night had settled in completely, and the wind rushed through the garden trees like a distant warning, yet the true storm lived inside the house itself. For weeks she had been writing down every troubling incident she witnessed, not out of some wish to oppose Ava, but because she feared that if she stayed silent any longer, she would become complicit in what was happening. For Emily was changing too quickly and too dangerously, and Ava's hold on the household was tightening with every passing day. Each time Michael came home, Ava transformed into a gentle, thoughtful, deeply understanding woman, recounting school stories, explaining that Emily needed discipline to grow, describing how she was teaching the child responsibility and respect, and Michael would nod, thank her, sometimes even praise her for doing what he believed he could not. Ava would smile and modestly dismiss the compliment, yet there was always a glint in her eyes, something icy that only Lena seemed able to see. Lena had once thought Ava was merely ambitious, a woman seeking her place in the household, but as time passed, she realized Ava did not simply want to join Michael's life, she wanted to erase every trace of Claire, the wife he had lost. Old photographs on the walls slowly disappeared, replaced by abstract paintings. The items Claire cherished were moved into storage or quietly sold under the excuse of refreshing the space. The kitchen, Claire once filled with warmth, stood dark unless Lena turned on the light, and Emily, the last piece of Claire left in this house, was being reshaped into something unrecognizable, a child without memories, without a voice, without the light that once lived in her eyes. One afternoon, while tidying Michael's study, Lena stumbled upon a stack of Ava's notes, detailed observations of Emily's routines, habits, and even her vulnerabilities. And one page chilled Lena to the bone, describing Emily as prone to withdrawal, highly compliant under punishment, and more obedient when deprived of emotional support, with a note insisting that discipline must be maintained and emotional contact limited, especially with the housekeeper. Lena set the papers down, her hands trembling, for these were not the thoughts of a concerned stepmother, but the blueprint of someone planning manipulation. She knew that if she spoke up, Michael would not believe her. So deeply did he trust Ava's soft voice and practiced sweetness, yet she also knew she could not wait until things grew worse. She began quietly recording the conversations between Ava and Emily when she could, collecting images of the faint bruises that appeared on the girl's arms and legs, bruises Emily never dared explain, only shaking her head and claiming she had fallen, though Lena knew the difference between the clumsy scrape of a child and the imprint of a hand gripping too hard. She even started speaking with Emily's teachers during pickups, and though they offered no direct commentary, Lena sensed their hesitation each time Ava's name surfaced. Until one day, the homeroom teacher said a single sentence. Lena never forgot. She is very well behaved, but she never speaks unless asked, and she always looks down as if afraid to disappoint someone. That night, Lena sat in her room for a long time, staring out the window toward the faint light still glowing from Emily's room, knowing the child was awake, knowing that a smile could hide many things, and understanding that if she was the only person who could see what lay behind that smile, she had to act. Because if no one believed Emily and no one protected her, then at the very least there had to be one person who faced the truth without turning away, and that person had to be her. Michael came home late on a weekday evening. His sleek car pulled up to the front of the villa, headlights casting a cold beam across the granite steps. He entered the house to the click of keys and the echo of his polished shoes on the gleaming wood floor. In the kitchen, Lena stood still, drying dishes, her heart pounding. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Waiting for a rare sliver of privacy, a time when Ava was not around, so she could finally speak the truth she had carried for too long, the things she had seen, the evidence she had gathered, and above all, the growing fear that lived inside a little girl named Emily. When Michael stepped into the living room, Lena walked forward, her voice steady. "Sir, I need to speak with you. Just for a moment." Michael paused, surprised, placing his briefcase on the table. His voice was low and tired from the long day. "What is it, Lena? Are you all right? It's not about me, it's about Emily. And about Miss Ava." The moment Lena spoke Ava's name, she saw something shift in Michael's face. Fatigue gave way to caution. He folded his arms and stood a little straighter. "What about Ava?" Lena drew in a deep breath. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm not making baseless accusations. But I'm genuinely concerned. I've seen Emily grow quieter and more withdrawn by the day. She no longer talks, she doesn't smile, she won't even draw anymore. Ava has imposed so many rules that the child is living in fear." Michael interrupted, his tone firm. "Emily needs discipline. She's been unstable since Claire passed. Ava is helping me keep things together. She's sacrificed a lot." Lena tightened her grip, her voice still even. "I understand. But I've seen her punish Emily for things so small. She's withheld meals, threatened to throw away toys, said things that make the child feel like a burden." Michael's brow furrowed, and he stepped back slightly. "Are you accusing Ava of mistreating my daughter?" Lena nodded slowly. "I'm not using that word, but I have proof. I've recorded her words. I have pictures of bruises Emily can't explain. I think you need to look more closely." Michael turned away, walking toward the window, the pale golden light from the garden casting a cool glow across his back. He said nothing for a while. Then he turned around, his gaze sharper. "You're overstepping, Lena. Ava has brought stability to this family. She cares about Emily. She's helping me rebuild our lives. You don't know what we've been through." Lena didn't back down. "I know you're trying to do what's right, but you're not seeing what's right in front of you. Emily is not okay. And if this continues, she's going to be hurt in ways that don't heal." Michael raised a hand, cutting her off. "That's enough. I don't want to hear more. If you're uncomfortable, you're free to leave, but don't stand here and pass judgment on my personal life." Lena stood still, her eyes wet. She wasn't crying from rejection. She was crying because she had hoped that the father would listen, that he would ask questions, that he would look into his daughter's eyes and see what everyone else already saw. But that hope shattered faster than she expected. Michael walked out of the room, leaving Lena alone in the heavy silence. She stood there a long time before walking back to the kitchen and reaching for her phone. She opened the folder where she kept the recordings. In one of them, Ava's voice rang out, clear and composed. "Do you know why your father chose me? Because I don't cry like you. I know how to make him feel calm. If you want him to love you, learn to stay quiet." Lena turned off the recording quietly. She knew she had done the right thing by speaking. But she also understood something even clearer now. Michael didn't want to listen. Not because he didn't care, but because he was afraid. Afraid of the truth, afraid to admit he had trusted the wrong person. and perhaps most of all, afraid to admit that he had failed to protect his daughter. Lena looked up at the ceiling, where light from Emily's room still leaked through the cracked door. The child was still awake. She knew it. Because in a world where fathers didn't hear and the one in control always smiled, Emily had only one option left: silence. And Lena whispered to herself, "If he won't listen, I'll find someone who will. Whatever it takes. Because Emily deserves a childhood that no one has the right to take away." That night, long after the house had fallen into silence, Lena stood outside Emily's door, one hand resting gently on the knob, her heart heavy as stone. She knew Ava was asleep upstairs, and Michael had retreated into his study. She pressed her ear to the door. Inside, there was the faintest sound, like the rustle of fabric brushing against sheets, then nothing. She knocked softly, twice. No response came, but after a moment's hesitation she pushed the door open and stepped inside. Emily was sitting on her bed, her back turned to the door, clutching Mr. Flop tightly to her chest. The blanket was pulled up to her chin, but her small shoulders trembled beneath it. Lena moved slowly, settling on the edge of the bed without a word. She simply placed a hand on the blanket over Emily's legs. The child didn't look up, but after a few seconds she whispered, her voice so hoarse it sounded like it had been trapped in her throat for days. She said that if I tell anyone, Daddy will hate me. Lena's fingers tightened, forcing herself not to cry. "No one hates you, sweetheart. I see how hard you're trying." Emily shook her head. "No, I'm not good. I make too many mistakes. She says I'm selfish, I'm ungrateful, and that's why Mummy isn't here anymore." Lena froze, the words hitting her chest like a sudden blow. She turned toward Emily, gently brushing tangled hair from the girl's forehead. "Emily, listen to me. No one, not anyone, could ever make your mum leave. She loved you, more than anything in this world. You didn't do anything wrong. But Ava says Daddy needs quiet. A good child who doesn't cry, who doesn't make noise. Ava doesn't get to decide who you are. She's wrong." Lena's voice was firmer now, but still wrapped in care. She took Emily's hand, so small and cold in her own. The girl looked up at her, eyes brimming with tears. "But Daddy doesn't hear me. He doesn't believe me." Lena nodded, her voice barely holding. "I know. Sometimes grown-ups are afraid to believe things that hurt. But that doesn't mean the truth isn't real." Emily looked down again, hugging Mr. Flop tighter. "I dream about Mummy every night. She calls me, but I can't get to her. She keeps walking away." Lena smoothed a hand down her back. "That's not your fault. Your mum is still here. Right here." She tapped Emily's chest gently. "And if she could hold you right now, she'd tell you that you are the best thing that ever happened to her." The room remained quiet, bathed in the soft light of the night lamp, casting long, slow-moving shadows along the walls. Emily sat still, as though carrying a storm far too big for her 7-year-old frame. Lena held her hand tighter. "I need you to do something for me. I need you to tell the truth, not just to me, but to someone who can really help." Emily's whisper came through the silence. "Like who?" "Like your teacher. Like someone who will listen and wants to protect you. But you have to show them. No more hiding." Emily was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded, just a faint dip of her chin. But it was the bravest thing she'd done in a very long time. Lena leaned down and kissed her forehead. She knew this was only the first step. But for a child who had kept silent for far too long, even a whisper in the dark could be a scream. And that night, beneath the ticking of the clock and the gentle stretch of shadows across the wall, Lena made a silent promise. She would be the voice Emily never had. And no matter what it took, she would lead her out of the silence. The morning sky hung heavy with grey clouds, drifting slowly above Portland, mirroring the weight inside Emily's small chest as she stepped out of the car. Lena had brought her to school just as she did every day. Yet this time a fragile spark of hope flickered in her heart. Something had shifted in the child during their late-night conversation. Emily had not said much, but her eyes were different. They no longer held only silence. Beneath the quiet was something delicate, yet determined. Lena squeezed her hand firmly before they crossed the school gate. "Today, if you want to say something, you say it. No one has the right to frighten you." Emily nodded, eyes lowered, but her hand remained in Lena's much longer than usual. The school day began as it always did. Miss Martin, the homeroom teacher, took attendance, then asked the class to draw a picture of the place where they felt the safest. It was a simple activity, yet Emily sat motionless for a long moment, staring at the blank sheet of paper. Around her, classmates eagerly sketched parks, bedrooms, playgrounds, or the warm embrace of their parents. Emily looked at the colored pencil on her desk, then bent over the page and began to draw. She drew a small room with a bed, a cat-shaped nightlight, a woman sitting at the edge of the mattress, and a little girl holding a stuffed rabbit. No one in the picture was smiling. There were no bright colors, only shades of blue and gray. When Miss Martin walked past and saw the drawing, she paused. She leaned down gently. "Is this where you feel safe, Emily?" The child nodded without speaking. Miss Martin pulled up a chair and sat beside her, her expression softening. "Who is she?" "The woman in the picture." Emily looked at the drawing again. After a long pause, she whispered, "Miss Lena." Miss Martin smiled faintly. "And your parents?" Emily did not answer. Her hands tightened around the edge of the paper. "My mum is gone," she murmured. And then, for the first time in many months, her voice was not flat nor hollow. It broke. "I don't want to stay with Miss Ava. She's not nice like Daddy thinks. She scares me." Miss Martin's eyes widened, and the look on her face changed immediately. She placed her hand over Emily's. "Can you tell me more?" Emily bowed her head, and this time the tears came fast, unstoppable. "She yells at me when no one can hear. She grabs my arm and it hurts. She says, if I tell anyone, Daddy won't love me anymore. I don't know what to do. I just want my mum to come back." The last sentence escaped her in a trembling sob that silenced the entire room. Miss Martin quickly wrapped her arms around the child and signaled for the teaching assistant to take the other students outside to the playground. Lena, who had barely returned home and had not yet taken off her coat, received a call from the school office. The principal's voice was hesitant but firm. "Miss Lena, Emily has shared some rather serious things with her teacher. I believe we need to meet this afternoon." When Lena arrived, Emily was sitting in the counseling room, her eyes still red but calmer now. She held Mr. Flop tightly, staring at the doorway. The moment she saw Lena, she ran forward and threw her arms around her. "Today, I said it." Lena held her close, overwhelmed. She knew that what Emily had done was the bravest thing a child could do. It was not only a cry for help, it was proof that somewhere deep within her, Emily still believed just a little that an adult might protect her. And Lena promised herself that from this moment on, she would not let the child face this battle alone. 2 days after the conversation at school, a grey vehicle pulled up outside Michael's villa. From it stepped a tall woman, her hair neatly tied back, a dark coat draped over her shoulders, and a thick folder tucked under one arm. On her name badge were the words, *, Martha Collins, Child Protection Services, State of Oregon, *. When she knocked, it was Lena who answered. Her eyes carried the weight of tension, but beneath that was a fragile hope that had waited far too long to breathe. After months of silence and endurance, someone was finally here to listen. Ava appeared next, standing at the top of the stairs in a crisp white robe, her expression frozen in a mask of chilly politeness, as if the very act of this visit had insulted her. Michael wasn't home. Ava, ever poised, descended with her signature smile already in place. "I'm sorry, but next time, please schedule an appointment." This is a private residence. Martha didn't flinch. She calmly held out her credentials and stated that she was there to investigate a suspected case of emotional abuse involving a minor. Ava gave a tight, dismissive smile. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Emily's a sweet child. She's just struggling after her mother's death. I'm here to help her. Martha said nothing more. She requested to speak with Emily alone. After a moment of tense hesitation, Ava had no choice but to agree. Emily was sitting in the living room, her eyes wide when she saw a stranger. But when Lena came and gave her a small, reassuring nod, the child settled. Martha knelt to eye level and introduced herself, explaining gently that she was there to make sure Emily was safe. And then, in a voice soft but steady, Emily began to speak. She described the endless rules, the silent punishments, the threats that made her believe she didn't deserve to be loved. She talked about feeling like a burden, about being told that if she ever told anyone, her father would stop loving her. By the time she finished, Martha's face had changed. The calm professionalism remained, but behind her eyes was a grave seriousness. She took notes, thanked Emily, and promised her that what she said would not be ignored. But the real storm arrived when Michael came home. He received the notification from CPS. Around the same time, Ava was yelling into the phone, claiming Lena had conspired with the school to destroy their family. Michael entered the house like a tempest. He called Lena out, his face pale with fury. What did you say to them? Are you accusing Ava of abuse? You dragged my daughter into this for revenge? Lena stood her ground, refusing to look away. I said nothing. It was Emily. You don't have to believe me, but at least believe your own daughter. Michael's jaw clenched, his eyes reddened. He turned to Ava. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To get rid of her. Ava burst into tears. I've always loved Emily. I've done everything for her. Everything. Michael ran a hand through his hair, then stormed upstairs to his study, leaving behind a silence that felt like it might snap under the weight of one more breath. In the days that followed, the house grew, heavier with tension. Ava dropped the mask of sweetness. She spoke little, but watched everything and everyone with the quiet intensity of a wounded predator. Lena stayed close to Emily, as close as she could. The girl was still frightened, but also quietly relieved. The secret had been spoken. It had shape now. Witnesses. But consequences were beginning to show. One afternoon, Emily caught Ava standing just outside her door while she was on the phone with her teacher. Ava's expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was cold, calculating, and utterly still. So much so that Emily's body reacted before her mind could. She began to shake. Later, she whispered to Lena, "She's not going to let this go." I saw her face. She knows I broke the silence. Lena held her close, her voice low but firm. No one gets to threaten you now. I'm here. And CPS is here too. But deep inside, Lena knew the truth. When someone who thrives on control begins to lose it, they will do anything to reclaim it. And the real battle, the one between truth and deception, had only just begun. That morning, the sky over Portland hung thick with clouds, and the soft drizzle seemed to mirror the tension seeping into every corner of the house. Michael received the call from the school just minutes after stepping out of his study. The principal's voice was calm, not accusatory or alarmist, but it carried a weight that could not be mistaken. "We need you to come in. Miss Martin will be present, as well as the school counselor and a representative from Oregon Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you directly about Emily." Michael sat still in his car for a few seconds after the call ended, frozen by the tone of that request. He couldn't deny what was now clear: the way they spoke, the formality, the gravity. It wasn't about a grieving child anymore. This was something far more serious. But in his mind, he still heard Ava's tearful voice, still remembered the way she had cried and insisted she was being slandered. And caught between two conflicting stories, he didn't know who to believe. When Michael arrived at the school, the parking lot was already full. It was nearly the end of the day. He moved quickly down the hallway toward the office, unease twisting in his chest, though his face remained composed. As soon as the door opened, he saw them 3 women waiting, Miss Martin, tense, the principal, stern in a way rarely seen, and Martha Collins, from CPS, the same woman who had stood in his foyer just days earlier. Lena was not present, as they had requested. Emily had been taken to the counseling room, where she would stay during the meeting. Michael took a long breath and sat down. "Let's be direct. What's going on here?" Martha opened her folder. Her voice was professional, unshaken. "Sir, we need to clarify some serious concerns regarding Emily's well-being. She has shared troubling information with her teacher." Michael gave a short, humorless laugh. A 7-year-old who just lost her mother might say anything. "She's in pain. Could this be imagination, or perhaps influenced by someone?" The last sentence was heavy with implication. It hung in the air, clearly pointing to Lena, and with that, the room shifted. Miss Martin leaned forward, her voice measured but unyielding. "Sir, I've taught hundreds of children over the last 20 years. I know when a child is imagining things, when they're being influenced, and when they are speaking from real fear. Emily is not making this up. She trembles when she speaks about Ava, and no child can fake that kind of fear." Michael tightened his fists. He spoke slowly. "Ava loves Emily. She tries. If there's tension, it's just personality conflict. Kids can be difficult." The principal met his gaze with the kind of look adults reserve for someone refusing to face what they already know. "We have statements from the teacher, the counselor, and Child Protective Services. Every one of them says the same thing. Emily is experiencing emotional abuse." The words fell onto the table like a stone. Michael sat up straighter. "That's a very serious accusation. I don't believe Ava is capable of such a thing." Martha slid a printed report across the table. "This is a journal Lena kept over several months. We've verified the dates and the images attached. It documents incidents where Emily was denied meals for minor mistakes, toys destroyed, verbal intimidation, and a list of strict, unnatural rules a child her age was expected to follow." Each page he turned felt like a blade. He read one line aloud. Ava said, "You're weak, like your mother. Your father won't love you if you keep crying." His breath caught. Martha continued, "We also have recordings of Emily's conversations with me and her teacher. Her accounts align with the documented evidence. There is no sign that Lena coached or manipulated her in any way." Michael closed his eyes, his face torn in quiet agony. He wanted to deny it all. He wanted it to be a mistake. But the truth, piece by piece, was tightening around him like an invisible noose. A soft knock broke the silence. The door opened. Emily stepped inside, escorted by the counselor. When she saw her father, she ran to him, but this time she didn't smile. She didn't leap into his arms. She simply stood in front of him, looked up with red, tired eyes, and whispered, "Do you believe me?" That question, so simple, so fragile, cut straight through Michael's chest. He looked into her eyes just like Claire's, his late wife. Eyes that had always told the truth. Eyes that had waited too long to be seen. And finally, he did see. Michael wrapped his arms around his daughter, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm here now. I believe you." Emily let out a sob, the kind of cry that only comes when a weight has been carried too long and finally begins to lift. The room fell into deep silence. Martha stepped forward. "The next step is to ensure Emily's safety. If you cooperate, we'll handle this as gently as possible. But Ava must leave the house. Today." Michael nodded, without hesitation. In that moment, he understood this was no longer a struggle between conflicting stories or misplaced trust. This was a fight for his daughter. And it had just officially begun. That evening, after the meeting at the school had ended and Emily had been taken to rest by the counselor, Michael called Lena, his voice trembling despite his effort to keep it steady. "Lena, can you come back to the house tonight? I owe you an apology." There was a long pause on the other end, only the sound of a soft breath, and then Lena replied, her voice tired but free of resentment. "I will come, sir. I am coming for Emily. Not to hear you apologize." Michael closed his eyes as guilt rose within him like cold water climbing his chest. He knew he had pushed her into an unfair battle, had doubted the one person who truly saw the fear consuming his daughter. When they returned home, the air in the villa felt tight, as though it still held the breath of Ava from the days before. Elegant, polished, immaculate, yet shadowed, the house resembled the world Ava had crafted for far too long. Emily held her father's hand tightly as they stepped inside. Even the brightest walls felt threatening to a child who had endured things no one noticed in time. Michael knelt beside her. "No one will hurt you anymore, I promise." Emily nodded faintly, but her eyes still drifted to the corners where Ava once stood, once scolded, once smiled that cold smile. Near 6 in the evening, the doorbell rang. Lena stood on the porch with a small bag in hand, her face tired, yet her eyes steadier than ever. Emily ran to her. "Miss Lena." She threw herself into Lena's arms as if returning to the only warmth she trusted. Lena bent down and held her close, her hands trembling with emotion. "I am sorry you had to go through all of this." "I tried, sweetheart." Emily spoke so softly it seemed the air itself might swallow the words. "It was not your fault. It was not mine. It was the grown-ups." Lena whispered gently and kissed the child's tangled hair. Michael watched them, overwhelmed by gratitude and remorse, and he stepped forward, his voice low and sincere. "Lena, I do not know where to begin. I was blind. I did not listen, and it almost cost me my daughter." Lena looked at him for a moment. There was no anger, no bitterness, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had held a crying child for too many nights. "I only hope this time you truly listen. Not to me, but to Emily." Michael's eyes softened with emotion. "I will do everything, I promise." They moved inside. Dinner that night was simple soup and bread. No rigid rules about posture, no forced silence, no expectations shaped by fear. Emily ate only a little, yet for the first time she did not glance nervously toward the doorway or the shadows in the corners. Lena sat beside her, helping her hold the spoon and telling her small stories about the garden she once loved. Things seemed to be slowly returning, but not completely. When night fell and the house settled into quiet, Emily began to tremble. Every small sound made her flinch. Lena slept in her room, the wooden chair pulled close to the bed. Each time Emily startled, Lena placed a hand on her back and whispered, "It is all right. I am here." Yet Lena sensed the fear clinging to her. It lingered like Ava's shadow, still stood somewhere in the corners of the room, waiting for a crack to slip back through. Michael did not sleep. He stood in the kitchen with a glass of water he never drank, the warm light making him look older, worn by what he now knew. He understood that the legal fight with Ava would begin at dawn. He knew she would not go quietly. He knew he would face the fury of a woman who could not bear being exposed. But heavier than any of that was a quieter question he could no longer avoid. How could he have allowed all of this to happen under his own roof? Lena came downstairs for warm water and stopped when she saw him. After a brief pause, she spoke softly. "You cannot change what has happened, but you can decide what you do from this day forward." Michael nodded slowly. "I will do everything to keep Emily safe. And I need you here. Not only for her, but for me. I need someone who tells me the truth, even when I refuse to hear it." Lena did not smile, but there was a faint warmth in her eyes. They stood together in silence, listening to the wind outside and the steady breathing of Emily drifting down from upstairs. Ava had been removed from the house, but the darkness she left behind had not yet lifted. And none of them knew that the worst storm was still waiting beyond the horizon. 1 week after Ava left the villa, it seemed, at least on the surface, that everything was beginning to settle. Emily had started speaking more. She reached out to hug her father when he came home. She ate meals she once only poked at with her spoon before silently pushing them away. Lena still slept in her room at night, but Emily now slept more soundly, waking from nightmares less often. Michael had contacted a lawyer, worked closely with child protection services, and ensured that every legal safeguard around Emily was airtight. Ava had not made contact, but he knew her silence was not surrender. It was a warning. And then came the night. It was a stormy one. Rain slammed against the windows, and wind rattled the trees, their branches tapping at the glass like fingers. Lena woke first not from the noise, but from the chill that crept into her spine, something deeper than the air. The living room window was open. A cold gust funneled down the hallway, carrying a scent that didn't belong. Metallic, sharp. She stepped quietly downstairs and found Michael emerging from his room, pale. "You smell that too?" she whispered. He nodded. They followed the acrid scent to the kitchen, and there, in the dim light, they froze. On the white tile floor was a shattered bottle of deep red wine, rare, expensive, unopened. Michael had never touched it. Now its glass lay in splinters, soaked in dark crimson, and beside it, smeared across the tile, a small trail of blood, not much, just a single streak, like from a cut finger, but enough to make their stomachs sink. Lena ran upstairs. Emily's room was empty. The blanket tossed aside, her stuffed rabbit on the floor, the window flung open to the storm. She screamed, "Michael! Emily's gone!" Footsteps thundered through the house. They searched every room, study, closets, even the garage. Then Lena heard it, a faint sound, from the storage room behind the garage. She rushed in and found Emily curled in a corner beneath the shelving, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide and drowning in panic. "Ava." "She came in. She said she's taking me." "She knows the small tunnel under the fence." Michael dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around his daughter. Lena checked her hands. There it was, a small slice, just enough to bleed, a shard of glass. Someone had truly been in the house. Michael grabbed the phone and called the police. Officers arrived quickly. A search around the property confirmed it. Footprints in the wet soil behind the garden, leading to a section of the wooden fence that had rotted loose. It was hidden completely behind thick hydrangea bushes. Only someone who had lived there and knew the garden intimately would know that the planks could be pushed aside enough for a person to slip through. It had once been Ava's flower garden. One officer looked at Michael, his voice firm. "We can't be sure, but there's strong indication that someone entered the home, and if the child's account is accurate, the intruder is likely Ava Sterling. She knows the house, she knows the blind spots." Michael held his head in his hands, both furious and helpless. How could she have gone this far? But he already knew. Ava had never accepted failure. Nothing she did was without calculation, not even pretending to love Emily. Lena tended to the cut on Emily's hand, wrapping it gently as she whispered, "It's okay. You're safe now." But Emily didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the window, as if the shadow of Ava still lingered in the garden, watching, waiting for the smallest crack to slip through again. No one slept that night. Michael sat at the kitchen table, his face buried in his hands, the CPS paperwork spread out before him, documents confirming Ava had lost all rights of contact with Emily. But he knew. A court order meant nothing to someone who had already unraveled. The police promised increased patrols, a new alarm system would be installed. But Lena understood something deeper. Real safety didn't live in fences or flashing lights. It lived in presence. in never leaving Emily alone, not even for a moment. They had pulled her out of the dark once, but Ava was different. She was a shadow that smiled, that waited, and that always knew when her prey was most vulnerable. And though blood had already appeared on the floor, this was not the end. It was only the first warning. The morning after the break-in, the house remained wrapped in a thick silence, heavy as the storm clouds still lingering over Portland. The police had left just before dawn, their boots tracking faint prints across the wet porch after hours of questioning and combing through the property. They promised increased patrols and follow-ups, but none of that lifted the weight that clung to the air inside. Lena was exhausted, bone-deep weary, but her eyes never left Emily, who sat curled in a thick blanket on the sofa. The child hadn't spoken since the night before. Her eyes were vacant, floating somewhere between memory and shadow, as if her body had remained, but her mind had slipped into another world. Michael brewed coffee but forgot about it, the mug left cooling on the table. He sat unmoving for what felt like hours, staring at his hands, hands that had once held his daughter's, now stained, even if the blood had long since been washed away. He couldn't look at Lena, couldn't look at Emily, couldn't look at himself. Then Emily whispered, "My tummy feels cold." Lena was by her side in an instant, fingers brushing the girl's cheek, then forehead. No fever. But her breath was shallow and quick. Lena gently lifted the child's shirt. Along Emily's right side, just beneath the ribcage, a bruise had begun to bloom in shades of blue and green, deep, dark. Not a scratch from bumping a table. Something internal, something painful. Michael jumped to his feet and called an ambulance. Within minutes, red and blue lights painted the driveway. Paramedics moved with quiet urgency, lifting Emily gently onto a stretcher. She didn't cry, didn't ask questions, just stared up at the ceiling of the ambulance like she couldn't decide if she was dreaming or still trapped in some strange and cruel reality. Lena sat beside her, clutching her hand. Michael followed in his car, every mile heavier than the last. His heart thudded like a drum buried in snow, dull, muted, but relentless. At Street, Vincent's hospital. Doctors diagnosed Emily with mild internal bleeding, likely caused by blunt force trauma. A fall, a hard impact, a hand too rough. They asked Michael and Lena if they knew what had happened. Neither could answer. Ava. That name hovered between them like a cloud that refused to pass. Perhaps it was the last time Ava reached for Emily in the garden. Perhaps earlier, a shove, a squeeze too tight, a punishment Emily never dared mention. Under the sterile glow of hospital lights, time became distant and slow. Michael sat hunched on a bench in the hallway. His head cradled in shaking hands. He had never felt so powerless. Money, presents, good intentions, none of it had protected Emily, none of it had undone the harm. He had failed the only child Sarah left him. Through the glass, Lena watched Emily lying on the hospital bed, a drip line in her arm, her chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. For a moment, Lena's mind wandered to the first time she stepped into that beautiful, broken home. A man who couldn't look up from his grief, a woman who smiled too much with eyes too cold, and a little girl who clung to a stuffed rabbit like it was the last safe thing on earth. They had been a house of fractures pretending to be whole. Now they were trying to stitch those cracks shut, but every stitch pulled open another seam. The doctor came out eventually, removing his gloves with a practiced calm. He said Emily was stable, but the situation was complicated. He paused, speaking softer now, but with a note that cut through the quiet. "This bleeding didn't start tonight, Mr. Michael. It appears to be an older injury, a severe blow to the abdomen from perhaps a week ago that never healed properly. The physical stress and panic from tonight likely caused the damaged vessel to rupture fully." Michael nodded slowly, his eyes rimmed red. He didn't need the doctor to say the name. It wasn't a fall. It was Ava. a parting gift of cruelty she had left behind days ago, waiting like a time bomb inside his daughter. That night, Lena slept in the chair beside Emily's bed. Michael stayed in the corner, silent, watching over the small girl whose sleep was finally still, a tube running from her arm like a thread tethering her to safety. And under the hard, pale light of the hospital room, both of them knew the truth. Ava was gone. But the damage she left behind was not. It lived beneath the skin, in muscles that flinched at every sound. It lived in a little girl's heart, learning again slowly, painfully, that she was still worthy of love, even after being broken by it. And Michael, eyes fixed on his daughter, swore quietly to himself. He wouldn't leave her side. Not again. Not until she knew without doubt that this time someone would stay through the dark. For 5 long days, the hospital room where Emily lay became its own small world, cut off from the fast, echoing steps and clipped voices of the corridor beyond. Time inside moved differently. The walls seemed to breathe with the slow rise and fall of Emily's chest, and the fluorescent lights cast a soft, aching stillness over everything. Lena didn't leave her side, not for a single night. Michael traded shifts with her. Quietly, he fetched water, adjusted blankets, sat in the armchair by the bed, and spoke in a hushed voice about Claire, Emily's mother. He told stories from before the kind, with warm kitchens and bare feet on wooden floors, of Claire's laugh echoing down the halls, of how she used to dance in the kitchen, even on tired days, how she hummed the same song when she brushed Emily's hair. But Emily said nothing. Her eyes stayed open, often fixed on the ceiling light or drifting out the window to the dry, skeletal branch that tapped at the glass in the autumn wind. She did not weep, did not ask, did not blink at stories or songs or touch. The doctors called it emotional withdrawal, a protective state sometimes seen in children who've endured prolonged trauma. They said it was normal, necessary even. But to Lena and Michael, that silence felt like a void that could swallow anything good left inside them. On the 3rd day, Michael brought in a small wooden box, its surface dulled by time. Inside was a music box that had once sat on Claire's dresser. When he opened it, soft notes played, gentle and familiar, like breath against a window pane, a melody not just remembered, but lived. Emily didn't look, but her eyelids flickered, just barely. Lena saw it. She used to open it every morning, Lena said softly, right when the sun first touched the room. She said it was her way of saying hello to the day, no matter what that day held. Still, Emily didn't move again. The next day, a young nurse came in with a small bouquet, bright petals and uneven stems, clumsily bundled with ribbon. It was from her classmates, notes scribbled in crooked handwriting, a crayon drawing, a message from Miss Martin on a small card. "You are not alone." Lena read the card aloud, holding it gently in her hand like it might crumble. Emily turned her head slowly, cautiously, not toward Lena, but toward the flowers on the windowsill. Not much, just a glance. But it was something. By the 5th morning, the wind had picked up, loud enough to rattle the windows. The bare tree outside had lost another branch in the night. Lena stirred in her chair, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and turned to find Emily already awake. But this time, the child's eyes held something new. Not brightness, not peace, but awareness. Lena smiled gently. "Did you dream?" Emily gave the faintest nod. It was the first answer she'd given in 5 days. Lena reached for her hand, held it like something fragile. "What did you dream about?" Emily blinked, voice barely there. "Mom." She was there. She didn't say anything, but she held my hand. Lena lowered her head, tears finally slipping free. It was the first time Emily had spoken of her mother without fear, without breaking apart. When Michael entered with 2 cups of coffee, Lena looked up, her voice thick but steady. She spoke. She remembered Sarah. Michael set the cups aside, stepped to the bed, and knelt beside it. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at his daughter. "I'm here," he said at last. "And your mum? She's still here, sweetheart. In your heart, in every dream. You're not alone, Emily. And you don't have to be strong all by yourself anymore." Emily reached out, fingertips brushing the collar of his shirt like she was searching for something she used to know. Something safe. "She won't come back, right?" she whispered. "The other one." Michael's jaw tightened, but he held her hand and answered without hesitation. "No," he said, "I won't let her. I'll protect you, even if I have to fight myself to do it." Light poured in through the window, pale gold against the tangle of Emily's hair. For the first time in months, her eyes closed not from fear, but from rest. Lena and Michael sat quietly on either side of the bed, neither speaking. They didn't need to, because this was a turning point, not a miracle, not an ending, but a flicker, a moment that cracked the silence wide enough for light to pass through, a breath of life after 5 days of stillness. And for now, that was enough. Enough to believe that hope, no matter how fragile, was still alive. On the 6th morning, as the first light of day slipped through the hospital window, warm streaks of sunlight rested gently across the small hands, lying still on the bed. Emily stirred, the soft rustle of sheets brushing her skin like a breath in the quiet. Lena, who had dozed off with her head resting beside the mattress, jolted awake the moment she sensed movement. She lifted her head and met Emily's eyes, no longer glazed or distant, but fully, unmistakably present. The child's voice was barely more than a whisper, delicate as the hush of dawn. "Miss Lena, I want to sit up." Lena smiled and gently squeezed her hand. She adjusted the pillows, easing Emily into a sitting position with the care of someone holding something far more fragile than bone and skin. At that moment, Michael stepped into the room, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. He stopped in the doorway, frozen, eyes locked on his daughter as she looked directly at him for the first time in what felt like forever. The coffee cup fell from his hand, shattering against the floor with a sharp, echoing crack. In 2 strides, he was at her bedside, kneeling, wrapping his arms around her tiny frame and pressing his forehead against her arm like a man who had weathered a storm and finally found dry land. Emily looked at him, blinking slowly, unsure of the man before her whose face was cracked wide open with love and sorrow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I made you sad." Michael lifted his head, his voice breaking with every word. "No, sweetheart. No, it's me who's sorry. I'm the one who should have protected you. I should have seen it, heard it, believed you. I didn't. I failed you." Emily reached out, her fingers barely brushing his cheek. "But now you believe me." Lena turned away, quietly wiping tears from her face. She had never seen a man unravel so beautifully, not because he was broken, but because the love he felt for his child was deep enough to wash away even his greatest failures. Michael sank into the chair beside the bed, took Emily's hand again, and gently began telling her everything. That Ava was under investigation, that a court order was in place, that she would never be allowed near Emily again, that people were fighting for her, that she was safe now. Emily listened, her eyes wide and still, absorbing every word as if it were a story told from far away. Then she asked, softly, "Does Mama know? Does she know I tried?" Michael's hands trembled. From his wallet, he pulled a small photo of Claire, one he had kept close to his heart since the day she died. He placed it gently in Emily's open palm. "She always knew," he said, "and she would be so proud of you." Emily smiled, then a faint smile, but real. "I saw her. In a dream. She held my hand. She didn't speak, she just looked at me and cried." And Michael, who had held himself together for days, finally broke. Not with anger or panic, but with the quiet surrender of a man who loved too deeply, too imperfectly, and finally saw what he had almost lost. He wept into the hand of his daughter, while her small fingers touched his cheek like a balm. It was Emily now, comforting him. Lena stepped out of the room, leaving father and daughter alone in the soft morning light. She walked down the hallway and stood by the window, watching the last leaves of autumn drift past the glass. A cold wind moved through the corridor, but she didn't shiver. Not anymore, because something had shifted in that room. It wasn't healing brought on by medicine, nor the sterile safety of walls and wires. It was the quiet rebirth of a family torn apart, hollowed out, and somehow, impossibly, beginning again. And in Emily's eyes, there was no longer fear, no hiding, no silence. She had come back, and the heart of a father, long hardened and withdrawn, now knew how to ache, how to cry, and at last, how to love again, completely. 3 months later, as the pale winter sunlight slanted through the narrow window of a small courtroom in downtown Portland, where Ava Sterling's preliminary hearing was about to begin, the air inside the room felt thick with silence, a silence that was only broken by the sharp crack of the judge's gavel and the soft, deliberate rustle of attorneys turning over their case files. Ava sat across the room, her golden hair brushed to perfection, her face meticulously made up as if she was still heading to a lavish party instead of standing before the law. But no amount of makeup could disguise her eyes. In them flickered worry, confusion, and something darker, like rage, held too long beneath the surface. Michael entered with his attorney and Lena. He held tightly to Emily's hand. The child now looked healthier, her cheeks tinged with color after weeks of tender care. But her eyes still carried fear, still held that quiet alertness, like a door cracked halfway open to the world, but never fully inviting it in. Lena sat close by, her gaze fixed on Ava with unblinking intensity. She didn't look away, not even once, as the court clerk read aloud the charges. Emotional abuse of a minor, unlawful entry, threats, intentional harm. Ava's attorney tried to lessen the weight of it all, claiming mental instability, misunderstanding, the unbearable pressure she had once endured from public scrutiny and the expectations that came with her relationship with Michael. But no one in that room believed a word of it, especially not after the evidence was laid out. Security footage from the hallway near the garden, footprints, audio recordings of Emily describing the events, entries from Lena's journal, and the results of an independent psychological evaluation. It was all consistent. Ava had not only caused harm, she had manipulated, controlled, and concealed, all behind a flawless facade she maintained for years. When the prosecutor delivered his closing, his voice was calm, but the words struck the room like thunder. This was not a misunderstanding between adults. This was a textbook case of prolonged emotional abuse committed by a fully aware adult directed at a defenseless child. And what made it more devastating was this: the father did not see it. Michael bowed his head. He knew the words were true. And from that truth, he rose. He didn't read the statement his attorney had prepared. He spoke from his heart. I was blind. I chose to believe what was easy, rather than face what was painful. And my daughter paid the price for that delay. I am not here to seek revenge. I am here to seek justice for my daughter, so that other children, other parents, if they ever find themselves in the same darkness, won't close their eyes and turn away. When Emily was called to testify, the courtroom held its breath. She walked slowly, gripping tightly the worn, stuffed rabbit Lena had kept safe all these months. Before the court, her voice was soft as wind, but steady. She didn't hit me. She didn't leave big bruises. But she made me feel like I didn't deserve to be loved. I felt like a burden. I felt like a mistake. And that was the worst part. No one in the room could hide their emotion. The judge delivered the sentence shortly after. Ava Sterling was sentenced to 12 years in prison for child abuse and unlawful entry with intent to intimidate. It wasn't a long sentence compared to many others, but for someone who had lived entirely on image and reputation, those 12 years were an end. As she was escorted out, Ava looked back at Michael one last time. There was no anger in her eyes anymore, no arrogance, only a hollow gaze, empty as if she had lost everything, including herself. And in that moment, Michael felt no triumph, only sorrow. Sorrow for a person who had chosen the wrong path and left behind the deepest wound in his daughter's life. The trial ended. But within Emily, and within Michael, another door quietly opened. Ava was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was the long, slow journey of healing, and this time it had truly begun. That winter was colder than usual in Portland, but in the small house tucked quietly at the end of a snow-covered road, the warm light from the living room still shone each evening like a silent declaration that there was life here, there was warmth, and there was a family learning how to heal. After the trial, Emily returned home with Michael and Lena. Ava was in custody. The media reported swiftly, then faded away just as quickly. Michael declined all interview requests and made no public statements. To him, the only thing that mattered now was Emily and her safety. On the first day back, Emily walked through the house room by room, as if trying to see whether this place still belonged to her. Every room had been rearranged. Lena had changed the bed linens, cleaned out the dark corners where Ava used to stand silently watching. But when Emily reached the kitchen, she lingered, her eyes fixed on the cupboard where Ava once kept her crystal wine glasses, the ones no one else was allowed to touch. Michael quietly stepped beside her, sat down, and asked gently if she wanted him to throw them away. Emily nodded. That very night, he and Lena gathered everything that once belonged to Ava, packed it into a box, and took it out, not in anger, but like a quiet ritual of farewell, a necessary ending. But healing is never a straight line. Some nights, Emily still woke from nightmares. Some nights she called out for her mother. Other nights she cried without saying why. Michael began taking her to a child psychologist. At first, Emily said nothing. But little by little, through play, through drawing, and through carefully chosen questions, small pieces of memory began to reconnect. One afternoon, after a therapy session, Emily sat with Michael on the garden bench, the one they had fixed up, where new grass had taken root and fresh flowers bloomed. She asked him quietly, "Did you ever love her?" Michael fell silent. A question that seemed simple but held a sky full of memory. He answered slowly, "I thought I did, in the beginning. But now I know it was loneliness. I was afraid to face the pain of losing your mother, so I clung to something that sparkled, something I thought would help me forget. But you didn't forget," Emily said softly, "and you shouldn't either." "I know." Michael took her hand. "That was my biggest mistake. But because you remember, because you still carry your mother's image, I know now I have to relearn how to love you the right way." Lena stayed. She didn't accept the offer to become a full-time housekeeper. Instead, Michael asked her to become Emily's guardian, to care for her as part of the family. They didn't talk much about what the future might look like. They didn't give each other new names. But in every action, it was clear they understood who they were to one another. One rainy night, as Emily lay reading, she suddenly asked, "What if one day I grow up and I don't remember everything? What part will be the most real?" Lena answered after a pause, "What you feel. Not what people tell you, not what's written down, but the feeling when you know you are loved." Emily nodded, held her book close to her chest, and her eyes closed slowly, at peace. Michael stood in the doorway, having heard it all. He turned away, his heart a little lighter. He didn't wish for his daughter to forget the past. He only hoped that when she remembered it, she would no longer feel afraid. The hardest question Michael had asked himself over the past months was whether he still deserved to be a father. But in Emily's hugs, in the way her eyes met his each time she whispered goodnight, he began to find the answer. No one is born perfect. No one lives without mistakes. But a father who admits, who makes amends, and who never lets go, that is a real father. The house was no longer a silent shell of perfection. It now echoed with the sound of little footsteps racing down the hallway, with the soft notes of a piano as Emily practiced, one key at a time, with the smell of cinnamon waffles that Lena made every Sunday morning. A real home. And on the wall, beside the photo of Claire, was a new drawing Emily had made. 3 people, holding hands, a house, a sun, and in bright red crayon, the words written in a crooked, hopeful scrawl, "My family." No one said anything, but Michael knew. From the deepest wreckage, they were building something again. Something stronger, something better. And this time, they weren't avoiding the hard questions. They were facing them together, one step, one day, at a time. That spring arrived later than usual in Portland, but to Emily, every ray of sunlight, every budding flower on the branches, seemed more radiant than ever before. She was no longer the timid, withdrawn child who once clung to the shadows of the house. Now, Emily walked confidently into the kitchen, asking Lena how to beat eggs for waffle batter. She laughed out loud when flour clung to her fingers, and no longer cried when she accidentally spilled her milk. These small changes did not escape Michael. He saw them unfold day by day, and within him stirred a feeling that was hard to name. Perhaps it was pride, perhaps it was gratitude, or maybe it was both. Lena still lived in the house, no longer in the role of housekeeper, but as someone more deeply rooted, someone who belonged. Michael never named the relationship outright. He didn't need to. Each morning, he poured her coffee. She packed Emily's lunch. Then they sat together on the porch, quietly sharing the warmth of ordinary moments, as if they had always lived this way. Emily didn't call Lena Mum. But one night, as Lena tucked her into bed, the child whispered, "Will you stay here forever?" Lena didn't answer right away. She looked into Emily's eyes. No, longer filled with fear, but with hope. She nodded. "If you want me to." Emily nodded back gently. "I want you to." On weekends, the 3 of them worked together in the garden. Michael learned to tend plants from Lena, who spoke to them as if they could understand. Emily chose the flowers her mother once loved and began planting them in a corner she called Mum's garden. She placed a small drawing there, one she had made herself, showing Sarah in a white dress standing among the flowers, smiling. Every morning before school, Emily stopped by that corner to say hello, not as a ritual of obligation, but as a way of staying connected. From a distance, Michael watched his daughter, and emotion welled up in him. He knew Sarah was still here, not as a ghost, but as something living on in the spirit of their child. And that made the sense of loss feel less heavy. One night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Michael and Lena sat by the fireplace, its flickering light reflected in their tired but gentle eyes. Michael looked at her and said softly, "I never thought there would come a day when my heart could be stitched back together." Lena smiled, her voice as soft as the wind. "I didn't stitch it back. I just helped it keep beating." They needed no confessions, no promises. What they had endured together was proof enough. A family does not always begin with romance. Sometimes it begins in pain, in a plea for help, in sleepless nights by a hospital bed, in patient silence and unspoken comfort. Emily was the thread that bound them all. Not as a child needing rescue, but as a small soul who had led the adults in her life to relearn how to love the right way. That spring, when cherry blossoms bloomed across the yard, Emily ran beneath the trees, her dress billowing in the wind, holding a paper pinwheel that Lena had made. Michael and Lena stood on the steps, watching her. In that moment, neither had to say a word. They both understood. This was the family they were always meant to be. Not perfect, not whole, but real and enduring. That afternoon, as the sun slowly slipped behind the western trees, the final golden rays of daylight cast long, gentle shadows across the grass in front of the porch. Emily sat on a small wooden chair, holding her old stuffed rabbit close to her chest, her eyes following the shifting colors in the sky. The breeze carried the faint scent of freshly cut grass, weaving it into every breath, and in that moment, everything felt quiet, tender, and deeply real. On her left arm, the small scar from a fall in the garden the previous year still remained, clearly visible. She used to look away from it, used to think of it as something ugly. But now, Emily traced it softly with her fingertip, as if to remember, because sometimes it is the imperfect marks that serve as proof of what we have survived, of what once seemed impossible but was faced and overcome. Michael sat beside her, silent. Lena came out with 2 warm glasses of milk, setting them gently on the table. No one said much in moments like these. They didn't need to, because the things that mattered most were already understood. In that house, after all the storms, there now lived a real family. A family that had been broken, that had once collapsed under the weight of mistakes, neglect, and invisible wounds, but had found a way to stand again through love, patience, and the courage to face the truth. Emily's scar was not just on her skin, it lived in her memory, in her heart, in the quiet sighs of her father, and in the silent embraces Lena had offered without words. But that scar was also where the light first entered. It was the place that showed she had not fallen apart, but had kept living, with strength and quiet grace. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson we can draw from this story, that in life there will always be pain, wrong turns, and people who hurt us. But if we are brave enough to face it, to change, and to love again, then even the most painful things can become the ground where something better begins. It was the journey of Michael, who went from a distracted and distant father drawn in by illusions to a man who learned how to listen, how to apologize, and how to stand up for his child. It was the journey of Lena, who loved quietly and without conditions, who never asked for a title, never demanded anything except the chance to do what was right. And above all, it was the journey of Emily, the little girl who once stayed silent out of fear, who once believed she was not worthy of love, but who now could smile and call this place her home. And what about you? After hearing this story, how do you feel? Have there been moments in your life when you felt like Emily, like Michael, or like Lena? Leave a comment below. We would love to hear what your heart truly feels, because every story is a mirror, and what you share may be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If this story touched you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone you care about. Emotional Echoes will continue bringing you heartfelt stories filled with depth, reflection, and hope every single day. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this journey. We wish you good health, a peaceful life, and the joy of living fully in every moment. Until next time.